Good evening, y'all. This is the JP Dinnell podcast, and I am JP Dinnell, and I am with Lucas once again. What's up, Lucas?
What's going on, man? Good evening.
How you doing?
Fantastic. How are you?
It is definitely not morning.
It is not morning this go round. It is not.
It is in the evening. Looking forward to diving into this because we have with us Codey Gandy. What's up, buddy?
Just happy to be here.
Let's go.
Almost 10 o'clock, but no place I'd rather be than right here with you guys.
I have the honor of having Codey Gandy with us today. Cody is here for some work that we're going to be doing this week for Echelon Front. And Cody, I would love for you just to kind of share with our listeners, where are you from? Like just tell us about where you grew up, sports, what was your family like? And then we'll start opening up doors to what you do right now in your current family. And let's go from childhood up until what made you leave for the military.
Childhood to military. Okay. So I grew up in Northern California. So I grew up near Sacramento, north, probably about 30 minutes. It's an amazing spot. A lot of people have bad things to say about California. I didn't have that growing up. Where I lived, I'm an hour and a half away from Lake Tahoe, an hour and a half away from the beach, and you can't really compete with that. And so as a kid, I really had no complaints. I had a loving family. I have a little sister who's one of my closest friends to this day, which has been cool. Obviously, as a kid, you don't really see it that way, but we're really close. Her name's Samantha. My parents growing up, my dad, law enforcement. So when I was really little, that was my first ever, what I saw as a kid was my dad going into law enforcement. Started off in a sheriff's department, local PD, and now he's still out there, in his 60s, still getting it after it at a very fast-paced department.
That's insane.
That's crazy.
Which, especially in this day and age, it's pretty remarkable that he's still doing that. So that's what I had to look up to and got to share dinners with as a kid. And then my mom, early on, it was raising me and my sister, and then eventually she ventured off, self-employed, went into real estate, and she did dual hat. So she's raising us crazy kids and doing that full time while my dad is doing your traditional police time away from home. So it was a lot of give and go. So as a kid, I was fully engulfed in sports. I would say I had a step on a lot of people in the athletic department, which sadly forced me not to take it seriously or put forward the effort because some of it was just given to me. So growing up, it was wrestling, football, and baseball, and then football and baseball really took hold where that was a year-round thing from, third grade until college. And so always busy with sports, which I loved, but obviously there's that burnout associated with it. And the older that I got, I fell into the wrong people, want to make wrong decisions. But for the most part, man, I had no complaints. My parents, they loved us. They gave us every opportunity for success. We did a lot of cool stuff at a very young age, going camping every weekend, going to Santa Cruz, going to Disneyland. Even with the busy schedules that they had, they put us first, which is something that I've learned that I need to do as a father now, which I know we're not talking about that yet, but something that I learned on was the sacrifices that they made for me as a kid. You're not really aware of that whatsoever. Yeah. Your perception as a kid is, pea-sized. And so I wasn't grateful. I didn't acknowledge it until later on, sadly. But, for the early ages, man, it was just run and gun, athletics, school. Didn't have to study a whole lot. Could get away with things because of who I was in sports. Eventually, that got me into high school, where I lived in a small town where football and sports was everything, where everybody knows who the football kids are and stuff like that. And me, I'm not a speaker. I'm a huge introvert. And so being put in that light forced me out of that bubble, which I handled in a variety of ways. But man, really no complaints as a kid. Eventually going through high school and just learning the ins and outs of life and trying to grow up and be a man, following in some footsteps of some older people that I knew. Eventually I decided that I wanted to try to play college football. Sadly, I weighed like 145 pounds my senior year, like with my gear on. So that was an uphill battle. So I went to a junior college and then was going to try to walk on, but ended up blowing out my knee. Which at the time, again, 18 years old, my whole life's over.
Yeah.
And you know, my mission in my life, my why, that's what I wanted to do. It was completely gone. Again, the perception thing is a real thing. And for me, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I've always wanted to be in law enforcement because my dad's going on 30 plus years, and that's what I've known. And I've seen his friends and what he's been able to do. And so that was always there. But at 18, it wasn't in the cards for me.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing the right thing for that headspace. So I was lost. I didn't know what to do. And I had some very influential people in my life. One of them sitting at this table who was in the military. And I had another buddy that was in the Marine Corps. Which during this time of my injury, were reaching back out to me to see how I was doing or just, you know, in conversation. And what was unique is, you know, you, JP, and my other buddy, Hayden, who was in the Marine Corps, you guys weren't talking about what you were going through, which you were dealing with losing people overseas, you're dealing with life and death. And that's when the concept of perspective, it started to turn over a little bit because I realized like what I actually was complaining about was not being able to play a sport. When in reality, like people these days, there's so much stuff that people go through, and people often compare their issues with other people's issues. When in reality, what I've learned is the problems that I face are typically just inconveniences in comparison to what other people have going on. And so hearing from you and my friends and just seeing what you were doing and what my other friends were doing and what I was doing, it put things into perspective. Like I need to make a change, and a good change, not just a change. And so from that, literally fresh out of surgery, not recommended to do anything, I went down to the recruiting office in Fairfield, California, and went to the Marine Corps recruiter. I was like, hey, I want to leave with crutches, cast on my knees. Like, hey, man, I can't touch you for like 6 months. And I left like 2 months later, which was not, I don't recommend that.
Just think about like everything you hear about Marines just being so mentally tough, Lucas. Like they're animals, right?
Yeah.
Like in a good way. I mean, animals like just awesome studs. And Cody's like walks into the recruiting office with crutches, like, "Hey, can I leave right now?" They're like, "What are you talking about?" No, it's going to be 6 to 9 months. He's like, "Cool." Comes back, leaves 2 months later.
That's awesome.
What type of prep did you have to do to be able to like leave that quick?
Well, I wasn't a runner, and the Marine Corps, the fitness test is a 3-mile run. And in football, you don't run 3 miles, you do sprints. So I was a sprinter, so I'd never ran longer than like a mile and a half. And so I'm fresh off knee surgery, can barely walk, and I'm just forcing my knee to recover, which the body will do an amazing thing under stress. And it was either it's going to break and go back to where it was, or it's going to overcome what's being thrown at it. And every day for a couple months, I just threw the gauntlet at my knee to see what I can do. And what's unique is my first initial test at boot camp, which I enlisted in October 2010, I ran like a 24-minute 3-mile, which it's not good. Marine Corps standards is 18 is a perfect score, 18 minutes. And I ran 24, and that was like my 100%. And then through my training beforehand in the 3 months in boot camp, I got it down to like 18:30. Just due to, you know, testing the limits of the human body.
Good Lord.
So it was a lot of just determination, and I wasn't all that tested as a kid in terms of rising above stuff or adversity in sports and things like that. So the Marine Corps was definitely a test, something that was new to me. I wasn't, you know, a leader in sports. I was the quiet person that would just perform. I would lead by example. In that way, I was never the guy in the huddle that would, you know, have the pep talk and stuff like that. Even when they asked me to, or my coaches would lean on me, it's not who I was.
Yeah.
And then joining the Marine Corps, I just thrust myself into foreign situations. I wanted to test myself more than anything, and that's exactly what the Marine Corps did. Day one, when you show up, they're trying to get everything they can out of you.
The mental toughness that has to take for you to decide that is pretty incredible if you think about that. And I mean, we could stop right now, and there's listeners that have a handful of things that they could take and apply to their life just from what you talked about. I mean, the parenting aspect, let's give a shout out to Mike and Jurley Gandy, like for just everything that they did for you growing up, you and Samantha. And, you know, I've known you your whole life, right? You know, I remember when you were born, and, we've grown up together. And like, I just remember coming home from Ramadi and going to your football game, your high school football game, because your mom invited me to come to it. And, we had some other common friends and family members that were there, and it was just a really cool thing seeing you there. And like, you're game day Gandy. You show up and perform at a high level, man. Game day Gandy. Let's go.
That's not a name.
It might be a name now.
Sounds like a name.
I don't know. Game day Gandy. Let's go. Obviously, high level athlete. You're super humble about that, and for you to be able to dive into that mental fortitude to get yourself to go do something that you didn't have to do. It was because you chose to do it. It's what you wanted to do, which I think is really awesome. What was boot camp like for you? Was it fun? Was it horrible? I mean, obviously you performed physically. Were you at the top of your class? Like,
Yeah, I mean, so the initial 3 months, the motto of the Marine Corps boot camp is they break you down and build you back up.
Yeah.
Because you have 100 people in a platoon, and they're trying to take this melting pot of individuals with all backgrounds in athletics and whatever you can think of is thrown into a platoon, and they're trying to clay form you into a Marine, who is disciplined, who can listen to orders, and just is a stud in every aspect of their life. And so showing up, I really didn't know what to expect. My buddy who was a Marine gave me literally zero insight. All he told me was, don't touch your face. Like, that was my advice that I was given in boot camp, which
I wanted to not touch my face.
If you touch your face, you'll get in trouble, is all I'll say. And so it was 3 months of physical torture. Which I loved because that was the life that I lived. And so that was nothing new for me. What was new was being put into a leadership position. So I didn't envision myself being a leader in the platoon. There's 100 kids. I was a year older than everybody else. I was 19 and they were all 18. So there wasn't much that was different between us. But about 2 weeks in, the number one person in the platoon is called a guide, and that person carries, a guide on, which is a flag that tells your platoon, and they walk in front of the platoon. They're like the number one person who you look at, and our guide was at the dentist or something like that, which I was told to never go to the dentist, don't go to sick call, like, don't ever do any of that. And so this guy went to the dentist, and our drill instructors are yelling at us and saying, hey, someone needs to go get the flag. And there's 199 people just sitting there and nobody's doing anything. And I don't know what it was. It's not me at all. And I was the only person. I ran up and got the flag, and I ended up taking that flag and being the guide for the rest of the 3 months, which was cool because graduated first of my class out of the 115 kids. And then out of all 750 plus, I was the second guy. Got to graduate in a different uniform in our dress blues while everyone was in Charlie's. So that was cool when my family, when you were there and your uniform, to be able to see me graduate like that. That's so rad. I don't know what it was, but something was telling me like, hey, give this a chance. And then once I took that guide on and I was the number one person in the platoon, which you pay for that. So if I'm in charge of you guys, whatever you mess up, I have to pay for that as well. So that was a burden, a heavy burden, but it was a physical burden, which I appreciated. And just the bonds that were formed during those hard, difficult times is something that the Marine Corps is really good at. When you do tough stuff together, it's a brotherhood. And I think the Marine Corps does a really good job with their culture, where I see a Marine who I've never met, no training with, and I just know you're a Marine, I just know what you've been through. It's a cultural thing, which is really cool to see. And so the 3 months, it went by slow day to day, but I look back and it was a blink. But I loved it. I love the aspect. I love what they do. The effort to instill discipline in a bunch of kids that think they're men, when 3 months later they actually are turned into men, or in some way, shape, or form, and ready to set forth back into the fleet or wherever they go.
That's incredible. So yeah, I have a picture, and I know you have it too. I've sent it to you, and I have a picture of us at your graduation, and it was cool because you graduated at the top. You were in your dress blues. I was in my dress blues for that graduation, which was pretty rad. That's a rarity, for us to be able to do that. Not for us, but for anybody to be able to go do that, because most of the graduates are not going to be in that dress uniform, which I remember that, and I remember that being unique, and that was super cool. You said two things I want to kind of open up or dive down or pull the thread, whatever you want to say on that. You said you felt like drawn towards that leadership. How many people do you think ignore that and miss out on something great in their life? Because that wasn't comfortable for you. That's not who you were. And like, so what's your thoughts on how many people like just let things pass by in their lives because they're not willing to be uncomfortable? And what would your advice be in regards to that? If somebody's feeling that way, it's something comes in their life, they're like, and then like, how do you overcome that? Like, what did you do?
I would say to your first question was, what percentage of people? I think it's a very high percentage. I wouldn't be able to put a number on it, but I think it's more than people are aware of, because you're talking about uncomfortable situations. You're talking about, your natural temperament, your habits and tendencies, and doing the complete opposite of that. It's foreign. It's scary. Hey, as a human race, we like our cut way, we like our path, we like the path of least resistance. And then I have this other thing, which is very challenging, very hard. There's failure associated with, there's embarrassment and all this stuff. Like, not many people are willing to go through that just because of what is entailed over there. So for me, part of the reason why I joined was I wanted a test, and in that moment, not one person was making a move, and there was a split second where we're like, well, why not me? The whole, if not me, then who?
Yeah.
It's a very real thing, and I think today, in as a society, a lot of people are we're reactive rather than proactive. So we see these problems, we see these issues, and we just, hopefully somebody does something about it. When in reality, I think the mindset should be, and what I've learned to adopt is like, why can't I solve that problem? And so in that moment in time, like, nobody wanted to do anything, and it was like my first inkling of like, hey, why can't I do something about it? I've done a bunch of good stuff in my past life in sports, and maybe I wasn't this outspoken person, but like what happens if I do that? What's the worst thing that could possibly happen? And I think that's a question a lot of people need to ask themselves is, what's the worst thing? I make a mistake, I embarrass myself for 10 seconds, and honestly, nobody's aware except for myself.
Yeah.
It's just to blow up my ego when other people don't even recognize that I messed up in the first place. So I think asking yourself that question in the first place on what's the worst thing that can happen? And for a lot of people, it's very minor. It's nothing even to worry about. In addition, to ask yourself, what happens if this goes through? Like, what happens if I do excel? What happens if I try something that's foreign and I do a very good job? If I change my profession into something that's totally opposite of what I'm doing and it takes off, you don't know what you don't know. Like, you don't know what is put in front of you, and if you take that on, what potentially can happen. And I think that new thing a lot of people are afraid of just due to the what ifs.
Yeah.
But as you know, you can't just have these what if conversations because you don't know, and nobody knows. So I ask myself those two questions in a lot of things that I do is, what's the worst thing that can happen? Additionally, what's the best outcome that can happen? And I weigh those, and typically what's the best thing outweighs that failure piece 10-1.
Yeah. Think about the risk, not risk, but like what you and I both did for what we do at Echelon Front. I mean, you know my story about, and most of the listeners know that story, and if not, we'll dive into it in the future. But the opportunity that Echelon Life gave me, and I was just like, okay, like I know there's not going to be anything else like this, and I knew it was an opportunity. And I also had another pretty solid gig offer at the time to go make some decent money, and we didn't have a lot of money. It was just like, okay, I had to weigh that out, and luckily I had the counsel of my wife who also recognized the opportunity and reminded me that, hey, you can trust Echelon Life. Like, they've never done you wrong, and they're never going to do you wrong. And then, when you came to Echelon Front, like, I know we'll get into that a little bit later, but you were a little hesitant, like, I don't really know what, like, this doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know, I have to see it. And then when you saw it, you're like, oh, okay, this makes a little more, like, this is awesome. You said one other thing, like, when you were in that leadership position, you paid for it, because anything that they did wrong, you paid for it physically. Can you expand upon that in a leadership lens of like what we teach at Echelon Front? I know we haven't even gotten into that yet, but Cody is a full-time leadership instructor at Echelon Front. He is our director of experiential leadership training. So all of the hands-on scenario-based leadership training that we run at Echelon Front, that's Cody's department, helps build out all of our first responder training programs with Danny Zeem, and it just awesome stuff instructor. We'll get into that. But when you were saying that about in boot camp, I I was smiling because I was like, man, there's just so many correlations to that in life in regards to like leadership. And when you're in that leadership position, it is your responsibility for your group, no matter what. So what do you got on that?
I mean, you talk about this all the time, the burden of leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and I think what a lot of people are naive of is, the consequences of, what they do in a leadership position. So what I tell a lot of people is, what you say and what you don't say, what you do and what you don't do. When you're in charge of people, whether that's your family or just your coworkers or a team or a company, like all those things carry weight. And that weight is a lot bigger than we actually think.
Yeah.
Because if you're my teammate and I tell you the truth or I tell you how I truly feel, like there's a severe consequence. And I'm probably naive to that because of who I am and because my ego is going to protect that. But that could put you in a very, pivotal position to where you quit, you don't start showing up, you take that out on your family. Like our actions have consequences. And when you're in charge of people, whether it's in the military where the mission is, it's highly elevated, you're dealing with life and death, or if you're back in the civilian sector, it doesn't matter. Like being in charge of people is being in charge of people. And that weight, that burden is a very real thing. And I think people are naive. They don't want to think about it because they're afraid of what that actually means. But it should actually be a good thing because if I'm at least aware of what I do and what I don't do, then I also need to recognize the potential of what I do if I do things right. Because if I take care of my team, like what is that going to transfer over to? If I take care of JP, who's my subordinate, man, he's going to go take that on with his team and take care of people. He's going to take that back to his family. He's going to be a better husband, a better teammate. Like you have that ability when you're in that leadership position. And so I saw that firsthand, and it was physical at first, but then I soon realized that, hey, what I did as this number one person in the platoon, like I had the potential to, save them from getting in trouble with the drill instructors, or I had the ability to put them in even a worse situation. So that burden is a real thing. And I know, to steal your thunder, hey, that burden, what typically associates with that is, the more you carry it, the more aware you are of it, the easier it is.
Yeah.
And it's just like a pack, like you always talk about. I'm not going to steal
No.
the whole speech.
No, do it. Like, I mean, it's either you do it now or I do it in the future, or when you come back on in the future, we do it. It doesn't matter. Like what Cody's talking about is, when you wear a rucksack in the military, this is where I first thought about it, was like when you wear a rucksack in the military, it's freaking heavy. It's a lot of weight. And then they start loading more stuff into it. But as you set up your rucksack properly, like a rucksack is designed to carry weight to where it doesn't break you down.
Yeah.
If you set your rucksack up properly, if you pack it properly, if you put the weight on your hips and it's not on your shoulders and not, like you can carry a good amount of weight if it's set up properly. And Cody and I both talk about this at Echelon Front with the field training exercises that Cody runs, about how do you carry that burden of leadership? It's through the laws of combat. And that's what we teach at Echelon Front, is how to be a good leader, how to be a good husband, how to be a good wife, how to be a good parent. It's through the laws of combat. And people see that firsthand in the field training exercise programs that we run, or they come to a muster, or they come to a battlefield review, or they go to the council. Like any of the events that we have at Echelon Front, you're going to see the principles, and in the hands-on scenario-based leadership training that Cody runs, you're going to feel those principles. And at the very beginning of that day, like we're going to be starting this off tomorrow morning, bright and early, they're going to have their rucksacks all jacked up.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be top heavy and lopsided, and they're going to be missing straps, and they're just going to, they're not going to take the time to properly set up their gear. But as the day goes on, they're a little more mindful of like, oh, let me make sure the weight is perfectly balanced, and let me tighten up these straps, and let me loosen these, like with a rucksack. And then when you use the laws of combat to lead yourself and to lead the people around you, it makes it to where you can bear that burden of leadership. And like you were saying, you do it for the people around you. And the more you do it, the more your body adjusts to that weight, because you get stronger. Like, right? You carry a rucksack, you're a physical phenom. Your workouts are disgusting, and I love them. And whenever I'm like, Cody, what's the workout? He sends it to me. I'm like, I should have maybe just not asked for that today. But you ask it, and you got to do it. You got to make the commitment. Yeah, he made a memorial workout for one of his leaders, and it's a mile of walking lunges with weight.
That doesn't make sense.
I know. It shouldn't make sense, right?
So I want us to talk about that a little bit later. So write it down in case I
Yeah.
forget.
Oh, yeah.
Which my TBI brain, I will forget. But yeah. So with you working out and you rucking, Cody, like the more you carry something, does your body get accustomed to it?
Oh, 100%.
So it's the same thing. Would you say it's the same thing when it comes to the more you use the leadership principles that we teach at Echelon Front and the more you exemplify them, not just know them, not just understand them, but live them and exemplify them like you do in your marriage and in your family and at Echelon Front, do you think it makes it easier to carry the burden of leadership?
100%, without a doubt.
So you have to be intentional.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yes, I love it. Man, there's so many ways I want to go with this, but we have to talk about your beautiful family before we go too deep because you're an amazing husband. You're an amazing father. I know a lot of people that follow you on social media, they get a lot out of your content for just being a better husband and a better father. One of the stories that you posted recently about you walked out in the backyard and there's a good amount of water there and it didn't rain. And you know how many people, I shared that because I was like, dude, this is a great example of detachment and being a great father and the great leader that you are. I've gotten a handful, like a handful of people that have replied to that and sent it back to me and goes, wow, like this is like a gut check for me to be a better husband, a better father. And, our buddy Josh, who's helping out the FTX, is just like, you ever read one of your buddy's posts and just realize, yeah, I've got a lot more to do as a father. Yeah, that's me. Cool. Like something along those lines. And so I want you to talk about your wife. If you want to talk about where you guys met or how you met, cool. If not, just I want to hear about I want the listeners to be able to hear about your family and just, obviously what they mean to you and how you conduct yourself as a husband and father.
Yes, sir. So I got out of the Marine Corps in 2015 with the intent of going back into law enforcement. Obviously, that didn't pan out because I joined Echelon Front.
Let's go.
But I met, yeah, no kidding. But I met my wife out in Arizona. So when I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to Arizona State. I had a buddy from Texas who we served together for the entire almost 6 years. And he was from Texas. I was from California. So we're like, let's meet in the middle and go to school together. And I had no intentions. I wanted to be single. I was just coming from Hawaii. I was like, I'm going to be single, go to college for 4 years. And then my buddy lasted about, a month trying to take an accelerated Mandarin course. And obviously it was not feasible to do.
You did or he
No,
did?
he did.
Oh, awesome.
So he lasted about a month in school and was like, this is too much, and went back to contracting. And so then there I was just alone and afraid in Arizona.
Afraid of that. I think you're
And then I met
It's a reality TV show.
no kidding.
alone and afraid in Arizona State University
And
featuring Game Day Gandy.
And then my buddy left, and I met my wife like 3 weeks in with no intention of dating or doing anything.
Yeah.
Which was unique because I always thought I'd be married younger. A lot of my friends in the military, and as you know, a lot of people are married and have kids, and I had a lot of buddies with kids, and I've always wanted kids. I've always wanted a good amount of kids. Like how my parents raised me, something I've always wanted to do is be a dad. And so even though it wasn't my intention in Arizona, I met my wife, and it just worked. Her name's Paige. We're, complete opposites in a lot of things. I mean, as you know, we had some trials during our dating where, not that we didn't see eye to eye, but some external things, family got involved to where they didn't see us aligning on who we needed to be or, our end state of being married. It wasn't in the cards for them. Yeah. So we faced some issues, but honestly, like those issues, it forged us, and we went through the ringer on day one, which led us to right now where everything we face now is honestly, it's just easy.
It's nothing compared to those days.
Absolutely. And so we dated for a little bit. Eventually, we got married, and now we have 4 young kids, all under the age of 5, which is fun and chaotic and crazy. All my kids have animal middle names. So my nickname as a kid was Bear, Cody Bear. And so my oldest is Bear, and I'll just use their middle names. But Bear, Wolf, Fox, and Ray. So 5, 4, 3, and 1-year-old.
So awesome.
I got questions about that later.
Yeah.
That's what we're about to have 2 under 2, and we're shooting for 4 under 5. So
That's what we got.
yeah, I'm
all ears.
Some life advice.
Yes, sir. So that we're done after 4. I think if our kids were a little more spread out, we'd probably have more. But I think the cards that we're dealt with, the travel that I do with Echelon Front and the potential burden if I don't listen to when I'm needed at home, it could get out of control. So 4 for us is our perfect scenario.
Dude, it's awesome. 4 is, it's a lot of kids.
We're outnumbered, yeah, 2 to 1.
It's a lot of kids.
I'm not good at math, but
Yeah. How does Paige handle you being gone so much?
I think the first thing is it starts with us aligning on what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
If this was just, a thing, if this was just a money grab, or if I was only in it for certain things, then she would be like, well, why are you doing it? Or it wouldn't be worth it when I was gone. So for us, it's understanding what I'm doing, aligning with what I'm doing, and her believing in the mission. And what's cool about that is in the last, almost 6 years, she's come see me speak one time a couple years ago, but besides that, she's had no musters, no anything. And just this last weekend, she went to the Women's Assembly, which Echelon Front hosted an all-women's event, and she was on a panel there, and it was her first time being fully introduced to all these concepts, which gave her some perspective on what I go through, and honestly, that made our alignment even stronger, even though I thought we were already there. But her gaining that perspective has helped us. But at the end of the day, it's us, being honest and open with each other. And, we've had last year specifically, I was gone 220 something days, and we had a conversation where that was my right lateral limit, which I'm thankful that we were in a place for her to have that conversation and say that, because if she didn't say that, then I wouldn't know. And then this year I'm like, cool, 300 days, book it. And then she would just be assuming that I would figure it out.
Yeah.
And in a world where communication is hard, even though it's just 2 people talking, assuming that someone is going to get it, that's not a good course of action. So aligning, being open, having conversations, and then when I am home, being fully intentional with what I'm doing. I mean, I am gone a lot, but when I'm home, I'm home.
You're 100% home.
Well, if I'm not, then what am I doing?
Well, that's a great statement / question that you just said. However, the reason why I said that is because I know myself, I'm very guilty, and I know there's got to at least be one more listener out there that is guilty of when they're home, they're not fully home. And that's something I've been trying to be much more intentional with, because I know you're very good at it. Dave Burke is very good at that as well, of just being like, hey, when you're home, you're home. You're 100% home. And now there's times where you and I have to jump on calls and work through stuff, and you go to your office and I'd go to my office. And I think, creating that separation is important, even though there is going to be work that needs to be done when you're home. But I noticed that you're very, very intentional with activities with the kids and always doing something fun with them. And I just wanted you to share that with the listeners, because I know there's so many people that probably need that as a gentle reminder of like, hey, when you're home, be a little more present. Go for the bike ride with your kids. Go let your kids get muddy and play in the backyard, and go down to the local creek where, I mean, how many pictures have you posted of just your kids covered in mud? And dude, your wife is a rock star also with it. It was just like, yep, this is chaos. This is my life. I love it. And there's like In-N-Out French fries all over, like just
still
the living
car.
Yeah, all over the living room. And your son's like sitting up on the shelf, like getting in the dog food. And you're like, how did you get up that high? He's just up there with this big smile, and the other kid's covered in chocolate candy. And it's just, I mean, you do a really good job at letting your kids be kids. Why do you think that's so important?
I think for me,
why do you do that?
Man.
I mean, you're a former Marine. Why aren't you like making them up at 4 a.m. doing a PT and, folding up their clothes and making their bed? And I mean, cause you could be a super strict, rigid, parent, but when it comes to parenting, not saying that it's like opposite of what a Marine should, but like your personality when it comes to parenting, would you agree is pretty like relaxed compared to like how most military people would?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Raise their kids?
And I think the answer I'll give will be in a question. And we haven't talked about this, so it's going to be dependent on what you say. But what do you think? What's the most common parental advice that people give you? Just because you have kids, what do people tell you? People that are older that have
Oh,
kids that are
yeah,
raised.
yeah. I know where you're going with this. I think like the time is fleeting.
Time is fleeting. Yeah, and I'll touch on that because if I'm ever going to write a book, it's going to be called Life Goes By Fast. The most common feedback I ever get, because I'm one of the younger people on our team and people that I talk to, is, hey, take advantage of the time you have with your kids because it's going to be like this. And that's true. I mean, I remember when Bear, my oldest, was born and I only had one kid like yesterday, and here we are now almost 6 years later. Now I have 4 kids. So that time goes by fast, and taking advantage of that time because you can't get it back.
Can't do anything with it, man.
I'm really intentional with that because I've already seen that play out to where early on I wasn't aware of that time where I was like, oh, you know what, he's 1, they're 2, like they're not going to remember these things. And what I've learned, especially at a young age with these kids, is they're probably not going to remember a lot of this stuff.
You'd be surprised.
I would be surprised, but honestly, who's going to remember this more is me and Paige.
Yes.
Like, we're going to remember the 16-hour trip we did up to Yellowstone where both my sons were throwing up in the car and the car broke down and it was just a mess. But when we were up there and what we were able to do with the kids and go to a cabin for my birthday last year and go to a bear zoo and the smile on their faces, they might remember the bears and stuff like that, but just the trip and the time that we had together, like, I'll remember that till the day that I die.
And that's an investment into your marriage,
Oh, 100%.
which your wife is so thankful for you being present to your kids.
Yeah, and I think, whenever I think we had Oakley, because I wasn't always this intentional. I think Jet or Bear, they brought me my phone when I was sitting in the room, like for me to use it. And that was just telling me like everything that I needed to know. Was like, that's what I was doing, was instead of being there with them, is that I was doing something not with them. And I've seen that over the years, is that there's this gravitational pull to like, yeah, I'm in the room, they're playing with Legos, they're doing something like this, is for me to pick this up. And when I do, there's immediately this snap on like, well, you're not here. And they're 5 and 4 and they don't know like exactly what's going on, but they're aware of what I'm not doing, which is being there with them. And so those, constant reminders, which I think ties to like being complacent as a parent, because I think even though my kids are young, there is a tendency to, oh, I just played with them, I was just there, we just went outside and stuff like that. But man, you're not going to get that time back. And I'm going to look back in a blink of an eye and they're going to be all in high school. And the one thing I'm going to wish is that I had more time of being there. And I don't ever want to have that conversation with myself. And that's hard because I could tell you, when you have 4 kids at the ages that I have, in my head, in a lot of people's head, because people, man, I get so much feedback. People are dumbfounded by the things that we do. Like, how do you do all this stuff? Like, why would you go do that? Like, that's crazy that you go out to restaurants with the 4 kids. And
why would you not? I can't fathom that, but I get it. Yeah, I get it.
And it's tough, and sometimes it's not easy. It is a lot easier with Paige being there as my teammate. But I will say, at the end of the day, I never want to have that conversation on, I wish I had that time back, because I hear that 10 out of 10 times from people that have older kids on, you're going to wish you had that time back.
Yeah. Some things for me to think about. How old were you when your dad's partner passed away?
So my dad's partner was killed by a drunk driver. Oh, man. I want to say it was like between 2006 and 2008. I know I should know that date, but I don't want to say the wrong answer.
Yeah.
So it was my partner. He was working nights on a freeway up in Roseville and was putting out some cones in an area where a car was off the side of the road, and he got clipped by a drunk driver. The guy drove away. His name was Matt Redding, part of Rockland PD. And so that was a huge awakening for me, being naive to like what law enforcement actually does, the dangers associated with it. Because, I mean, I know now my dad didn't tell me certain things as a kid. Like at dinner, he's not going to share all the bad. He's going to share the good. And when I go to the department, it's all the fun and the dogs, and you don't get to see all the bad associated with that. And so when that happened, it just cracked that door on like what the reality of law enforcement was. And seeing the community come together, seeing my dad go through that, which my dad's a very stoic, was very unemotional back in the day, and seeing him deal with that with all his coworkers and stuff like that, it opened up to the realities of, the world. Because there I was, 15, 16 years old, thinking that life is good, nothing ever goes wrong. And that was one of my first, reality checks on, hey, this is serious and bad things do happen. There are bad people out there. And it just really, it provided that context of, the perception that I was missing on, what the world's got going on.
Yeah. Did you have a driver's license at that time?
If I didn't, it happened like right after, because I graduated when I was 17, so I was one of the younger kids.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I didn't, then I got it like the year after.
Yeah, I'm trying to think the year. I want to say it was 2007. I think.
That sounds about right, because my senior year in high school, my senior project was a fundraiser for him and his family. And that was my senior, and that was 2009.
Yeah.
So it was either 2007, 2008.
Yeah, I was just curious how old you were, and like I just remember how devastating that was to your dad and to your family, and I mean the community for sure.
Yeah.
Like it helped your dad kind of open up a little bit, you said, just because he's kind of forced into doing that. Do you think your dad, because of his just most of your life, right, which is a good amount of his life, his adult life, was being in law enforcement? And I don't want to get into the details of all the different things that he's done over the years. It'd be cool to have him as a guest one day and just be able to kind of talk about some of those things. 'Cause I know he's been a part of some unique units that have done some pretty crazy things and added a lot of stress for you as his family, and a lot of things that you didn't even know about because you were young. And now as you got older, you learn about those things. You're like, wait, what? You were doing what? With who? For what? But do you think he was that stoic figure in your life because he had to, because of what he had experienced and what he had seen? And do you think it was a way for him to kind of just separate the two?
I think who he was it started with his dad. His dad was a Navy guy, very stern, very, very likable person, but a very stern and very strict. The punishment for my dad as a kid was, the belt. It was one of those. And so I think that started off on his path of being a very unemotional, stoic person. And then that line of work of being in law enforcement, I think the stigma attached to that is like, that's how you have to be, which part of that is true, because what they deal with, like if you're a very emotional person and dealing with those sorts of things, like that's a bad recipe.
I could not do what your dad has done. I can tell you that right now. Zero chance I could do what your dad has done.
Yeah, and
so much respect to him.
Oh, 100%. And for all, first responders in general, what they deal with.
Yes.
And especially now, in the last couple of years, it's a different game.
It's sad.
So I think part of it was his upbringing, and then step two, what they just went together was his profession, and I think he brought that home. And I think, again, me being a naive kid, part of it is I saw what I wanted to see. So I saw the non-emotional side. I saw the stoic side. I saw the sternness side, because that's what I thought that he should be. And so he may have been emotional when I was a kid, but either I didn't want to see it or I didn't see it in general. And so that put me on my path, which, for the most part, we are a reflection or some sort of way of our parents.
Yes.
I think that led me to, how I was brought up and who I am today. I would say, I think you would say this as well, I'm a very unemotional person.
You're much better than you were when you first came on board Echelon Front, which we're going to talk about that later.
Very reserved, but I think he did a good job with the blend eventually, and I think as age came about and his perspective changed, and now he has grandkids, he's definitely, that the curve has definitely happened to where he's a lot more open and wants to talk about these things. One, due to the fact that I'm 32 years old now and I can handle some of these conversations.
Yeah.
In considering I get to work with a lot of law enforcement, I'm not naive to what goes on anymore.
Yeah.
But also the emotional side with my kids, it's nice to see that come full circle, considering who he was and now who he is now.
That's awesome. What your mom being in real estate. I mean, she did a few other things. I remember when you guys were younger, but her being in real estate and in business for herself. What has that just taught you over the years of just her tenacity of just having to constantly work and work and work, right? I mean, the real estate industry can be awesome, but it's not easy. People just think they're going to get into real estate and be like, man, I'm going to make somewhat. No, that's not the case. And you've seen that. And so I know you've learned a lot over the years from your mom's work ethic and what she's done as well. I mean, if you were to think of like one thing like that your mom has taught you that you use, what would that be?
Yeah, I think I used to always gravitate towards what my dad did and like what he taught me. But a lot of that was due to the variables he was given in his environment, which they're very different than real estate. But for my mom, it's you have to go out and get what you want. So that determination and that grit that she showed, which it was new for her. She worked for a developer and started to sell houses that way. And she came her own real estate and then ran her own team and still doing it after all these years, all while raising, me, who I wasn't that pleasant of a teenager, and my sister. I commend her for that because she easily could have not done that or chose something where it was something more structured, something more safe, because real estate there's some risk involved, but she's damn good at what she does, and she proved to me that hard work component, and also, hey, there's nothing free in life, and if you do want something, like, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable, put yourself out there, and be willing to take on some risks to get to where you want to go. So
that's awesome. And she's a real estate agent in the Loomis, Rockland, Roseville area, or does she do all of Northern California, like the Sacramento greater area?
Yeah, she's based out of that Roseville. I think a lot of people typically know Roseville area. It's north of Sacramento, but she's all up and down the state, which is pretty cool. Still crushing it.
She does everything in California.
Yes, sir.
She can. So, Codey Gandy in Northern California. If somebody's needing any real estate help or advice, your mom can hook them up.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. So you got a pretty sweet scar on your eye.
I sure do.
You want to share that story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So 2015, I'm about a year from getting out of the Marine Corps. This salty individual who has it all figured out, or so they say.
And how old were you at the time? 24?
I think it was 24.
Yeah, you were born in 91.
Yep. So 24 years old, and I'm up stationed in Hawaii. So on Oahu, there's a Marine Corps base on the northeast side called Kaneohe Bay. I was part of 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, and the infantry out there. And we're running a training exercise for some Marines on the island, and we're running a bunch of new guys through an AT-4 course. So an AT-4, if you've seen any, war movie, it's a long green missile. It's a pressurized, shoulder-fired missile.
I believe he used it in Commando, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty badass. There's a lot of cool videos of people using it, and a lot of videos of people using it improperly.
Those are my favorite.
Which is what I ran into firsthand. And so what was unique about the whole thing is I wasn't there to participate. I was there to observe. I was a safety officer on the range. So being in a leadership position, I was just there to help make sure bad things didn't happen. We're there for a couple days. We're running daytime, nighttime, live fire rockets. And closer to the end of the week, the old cliche, hey, you do stuff more than one time, you do it a week at a time, that complacency starts to kick in. And we didn't do the proper checks, wasn't making sure people were up to speed, and we had a new guy get rushed to the range, and I was just there to observe, didn't properly communicate what was about to happen, and whatever this individual decided to do, they took a knee, tried to fire the rocket, and the rocket started to orientate towards the sky at a 45-degree angle. And being a pressurized rocket, when you pull the trigger, there's a big blast. It's called a back blast. Got shot into the ground. Then I was about 15 yards due east. That blast went into the ground, ricocheted at a 45-degree angle, and the debris, the blast, hit me in the face in my right eye. And so I get knocked out for, I don't know how long exactly, because I was knocked out, came to a little bit after, completely oblivious to what's going on. All I know is something is drastically wrong because I can't see, there's blood dripping down my face, and I can't hear. And so I walk up to our officer in charge at the time, the safety range officer. I'm like, sir, I don't know what happened, but something's drastically wrong. And it's weird what you remember about those situations, but I remember his face just ghost white as he shined a flashlight on my face. And he's like, hey, Roger that, let's get you off site. And what was cool about the whole thing is, as you know, in the SEAL teams, the amount of training that you do in the Marine Corps, it's no different. We don't get as cool as training, but we still train a lot. And the amount of training, the training just kicked in. It was like a movie scene. Like, not much had to be said. Everything was just a seamless process. They got me off site. I saw the doc on scene, and basically on range, if there's potential for loss of limb, death, or eyesight, you get medevaced out. So you go helicopter to the nearest hospital. That was quick. Flew to Pearl Harbor down south, and man, I was a mess. I know I've shared with this one time, but severe concussion, and I'm throwing up out of the helicopter, just down onto whatever is below us on the island. So hopefully nobody ran into that day. But
Be a random person down in Hawaii, all of a sudden they're like just doing their thing, all of a sudden throw up. Ugh.
yeah.
Sorry. All right.
I never heard anything, so but there's potential it didn't happen.
Somebody's listening one day.
That was me.
They're gonna be like, "Oh my gosh."
But got down to the Navy base, saw the doctor, and they got the pressure relief from my eye. Laceration on my eyelid, my cornea was scratched, and basically relieving the pressure was a big deal, according to the doctor. And we're talking about this after the fact with the debrief, and then the doc's like, hey, potentially another 5 to 10 minutes. Who knows what's going to happen to your eye, potential loss of eye or something worse. And so really thankful for not being thankful for being put in that situation, thankful for everything leading up to that.
Yeah.
Because without the training, without everyone being on the same page, without the SOPs, those standard operating procedures, I'd be looking like a different person right now.
Yeah, and I know you've shared this during the FTXs before, because we reiterate the importance of training. And I know when we do workshops, the importance of training, like there were some times leading up to that where your leadership would force you to do extra types of training, and it would frustrate you, but you didn't fully understand it and recognize it. And so, like, what would you say to anybody that's listening that, somebody in their life, whether it's a parent or somebody in their leadership chain, is like pushing them to train and create SOPs and just be smooth at what they operate? Like, what would you say to them that, when they're getting frustrated, like you were, like,
I didn't understand the why behind the training,
Yeah.
which it sounds crazy because being in the military, you train for a very specific reason. But the amount of training that we were doing, and oftentimes where I was like, why are we doing this? Like, I'm about to go on leave away from my team. Like, why are they calling me when I'm at home to cover a 9-line where this is how to move a casualty? When I was told the why, I didn't ask the why because I was a stubborn Marine, but when I was told the why and it was communicated properly and I understood it, then it started to make sense. And then sadly for me, it took having this severe accident to where I realized, like, oh, you know what saved me? It wasn't I'm a badass. It wasn't a perfect situation. It was the training. Mm-hmm. And without that training, who knows what's going to happen. And so I think for a lot of people, just being naive that, hey, training saves lives. I think training makes you better, because at the end of the day, regardless if you're in the military or in any profession, we can't think that we're just going to muster up and just solve anything thrown our way, especially if you've never seen it before. Like, we all face some sort of adversity, whether it's today or tomorrow. It's only a matter of time. Yeah. And if you don't put yourself through stressful situations, don't ever think that, hey, I'm just going to figure it out when it happens. Typically what will happen is you will fail, and that failure, whatever world you live in, that's, that could be death, that could be somebody getting hurt, loss of a business, loss of a teammate, a failed relationship. All that can equal us not being prepared for what's being thrown our way. I know you and I have talked about it. I know there is the cliche saying that people fall to their level of training, but I think to your point, training, we actually rise to our training.
Yes.
Because we don't start off, plus 10. We start off at 0.
Yeah.
And so when you train, you add little steps to you. And so we rise to our level of training. So the question everyone needs to ask is, what level are you at? And you have to be honest with yourself.
How far is that gap?
How far is that gap? So I think a lot of people, we think we have it all figured out, but there's so many scenarios where I don't think people are prepared for. But we all have egos, and we think that we're mighty and we can handle any situation. But the last thing you want to do is be put in a situation and say, man, I wish I was prepared for this.
Yeah.
Because you can't go back.
It's that complacency that creeps in, and obviously my family very well. You're very close with them, and Aiden's 17 and he's driving, and you and I have talked about a lot of things over the years with, Aiden and his progression of sports and school, and just how proud, like all of us, anybody that knows Aiden's like super proud. Like he's just a good kid and he works hard, and you were talking to him earlier, and he's just so excited, like to see when we were leaving church, and he was like, "Wait, is Cody going to be in the house?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's all excited, and that's one of the things I was really trying to reiterate to Aiden when he was learning to drive was like, hey, you got to constantly be scanning. You can't let that complacency creep in. Like you've got to be scanning and looking and assessing and thinking constantly. And that's one of the things that, you really reiterate and teach at Echelon Front with obviously the regular classroom training that you do. You give keynotes, you give half-day workshops, you give full-day workshops. Part of Dave Burke's LDAT programs was different clients, and you and I were at the battlefield recently, and that was incredible.
That was amazing.
And all the FTXs we were running is just not letting that complacency creep in. And I want just kind of tell us a little bit about like what you do here at Echelon Front. I know I've opened a few doors, but I mean, you've been on board with us. You came out and saw an FTX in 2018, and we offered you a full-time position shortly after. You're the first person that I brought on board Echelon Front, and still rock and roll, and took over a department, and you make my life so much easier because of everything that you do and who you are. And I appreciate, obviously, like everything that you do. And obviously I hope Paige, if she's listening to this, I hope that I love you, Paige, and I'm thankful for everything that you allow Cody to do and how busy he is, because he really helps just make a huge difference in people's lives all across the world, and my family as well. But tell us a little bit about Echelon Front and why it's important to you, and why you love doing what you do.
So I think the first thing I would want to say is when you invited me out in 2018, right?
It was October 2018.
October 2018.
To Michigan. It was beautiful.
So when I first came out, I was extremely skeptical on what was going to happen. Obviously, JP calls me like I'm going to go and do whatever he needs me to do. And what is funny is, the book Extreme Ownership, how, U.S. Navy SEALs lead and win. It's this military book, which a lot of people are afraid of, but it's just, where the stuff comes from. You guys being in the SEAL teams and me being in Marine, I could see that connection. The laws of combat, it made sense for me, but I was really unsure on the team's ability and, frankly, your ability to teach the stuff outside of the context of the military.
Yeah, because there's a gas and electric company up in Michigan.
It was a gas and electric company. And when I showed up there, these people were not excited to see Sir J.P. Dinnell.
It was a hostile work environment.
It was a hostile work environment. You had people that were standing up in the middle of the brief, going and banging their head against the wall, saying, "This is what it's like to work here." People blatantly, just disregarding whatever, no matter what JP could say, it was like, it doesn't matter. Just watching movies, walking out, they're running the FTX, and guys are just like, yeah, this is not for me. They're leaving the training and stuff like that. And that was like my first introduction. And I'm sitting there, I was like, holy cow, like, is this normal? Like, this is what you guys face? But honestly, it was eye-opening. And sadly, I didn't read the book coming into the training because, again, I'll use my excuse of being a stubborn Marine. But watching the people... I
clearly failed to, like, actually be like, communicate to you the importance of the book. I didn't do a good job communicating that to you.
Well, you shouldn't have had to, but here we are.
Okay.
But watching those people that were telling JP and the team, like, hey, there's nothing you could teach me. Like, hey, that worked for you as a SEAL, but that doesn't work for me as a lineman. Like, hearing that from, like, that was the first 30 seconds in the first hour. And then in 6 hours, you completely change a person's mindset, which that's hard to do. I think what's unique about Echelon Front is, we teach habits and tendencies, which... They're habits and tendencies. They're what you've been doing for the last 30 plus years or last 20 years. And then in one day, we're trying to change that. And then one day you did change that in the most dynamic, chaotic environment. And when I saw that, I was like, holy cow, like this is the real deal. And if you can convince those people who were, not on board whatsoever, I could only imagine what you're able to do with people that are on the fence or people in the game. And I think I've seen that firsthand now. Jocko, Leif, you and the rest of the team, what you've been able to do, change people's lives, it's absolutely amazing. So when I saw that with a very determined client that had wanted no part, I knew right then and there that you guys had something special. And for me, it was a hard decision because I was literally in background investigation out in Sacramento to go into law enforcement, which is something I've always wanted to do. So at the time, I'm asking myself, because you asked me like, hey, this client wants to do, at least a year's worth, like a bunch of stuff, like we could use you full time. And I was in background. I was like, it inevitable potentially is there for me to go in law enforcement. Yeah. But I knew in talking with Paige, the opportunity for Echelon Front potentially was going to go away if I said no. Law enforcement, even right now, like it's still a thing if I want to.
Yeah.
And so that's what immediately potentially opened that door. But what solidified my decision, and there was no turning back after that, was I read the book. And I know that sounds cliche coming from someone who teaches extreme ownership, but I think you know me well enough that I would never be a type of person that teaches things or talks about things that I don't believe in.
Yeah.
And what it took for me was, at this time I was going through the ringer as an individual. I moved back from Arizona to California. My parents were getting divorced. I was, me and Paige, we were just struggling with being a new family, having 2 young kids. I was making $500 every 2 weeks, clearing down burned down buildings. Background investigation was taking way too long, and I thought I was it. I was the guy that they were looking for, and that wasn't a reality. And so I had all these frustrations. I had this dynamic of, my in-laws and me not getting along, and just all these external things where none of it was my fault, or so I thought. And what's hard about that, and what a lot of people focus on these external things, is you can't focus on those things. What you can focus on is what you do. And when I read that book, it changed my perspective on all the things that I had control of, which, as you talk about, is your attitude, your mindset, your emotions, your ability to take ownership. And once I realized that, just like those people who didn't want to be there, I was that person that was completely switched. And I can tell you right now, I am completely and 100% a different person. My wife would agree. Who I was and who I am is only because of the book Extreme Ownership and you, Jocko, Leif, Dave, and the rest of the team, your influence over me. So that was my introduction. And that was, man, what, five years ago?
Yeah.
Coming up on 6 years. And from there, it's been a hell of a ride ever since.
Yeah. Which is crazy is the first week that you were doing that with us was that Friday was October 5th. So when this episode is released, we're literally right at the 5-year mark for when you first came out and did your first week with us. And like, it was awesome. I mean, having you out there, I had you and 4 other guys that were all awesome. Nobody really knew what they were doing because we had never done these before. And you guys hadn't done this type of work. I had in the SEAL teams. And that's why Jocko and Leif gave me the field training exercise program to build and develop. And, we've gone through so many different names. It was tactical training, tactical leadership training, but then, now it's experiential leadership training because Leif Babin was like, hey, this is what this means. And we're like, yeah, that makes sense. And so we started the field training exercises, and it was awesome to see how you took lead and how you took ownership. And, the one of the things that whenever I describe this concept of like knowledge isn't power, the application of knowledge is power. That's what makes you powerful. I always give you as an example because not only like when you read Extreme Ownership, you read it with intent, and you were acting as a role player with us. But after every run, you would sit down and listen in the debriefs. You would listen, you would take notes, you would ask me questions. You would come up to me and ask me like, hey, whatever question you had me. And my default response for a very long time was, what do you think? And that kind of frustrated you for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you finally were like, hey, I'm asking you this because I want to, I'm asking you because you used to run this training. This is what you know how to do. This is your department. And my response to you was, well, one, I want to know what you think. And two, like I remember I asked you one time, I was like, well, hey, if I wasn't here, what would you do? And you're like thinking about it, and you gave me an answer. And I said, cool, go do that. And for you and I, that was like a little aha moment in our relationship when it came to work for Echelon Front of like me. I was really seeing like how do you think? Like I really want to know how you thought when it came to leadership and what we did at Echelon Front. Like I knew like how you thought the other. Like I knew you were like a stoic, kind of quiet, shy guy. Like I knew that about you. I knew you're super athletic. I also knew that you're very, very, very intelligent. Like I've always known that about you. And so, but I really wanted to know how you were thinking these things. So I was asking you that, and that's when I told you that I was like, hey, I just want to know what you think. And then I told you, I'm like, hey, your goal is eventually to have, oh, by the way, conversations with me. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And we were just kind of working through that. And it was really cool seeing that click with you of just like, okay. But what I tell people about you is you exemplify these principles. You don't just know them, you exemplify them, you live these principles. What caused you to be intentional with like just living out these principles that we teach at Echelon Front, other than you're not going to teach and tell people to do stuff that you're not willing to do yourself?
Yeah, because then it just comes off hypocritical. But
And that intent has a smell.
I think for me, once I started to just give them just a chance, because I read it, to your point, full intent. I wanted to give this a try, and I saw what it was able to do for other people, so I want to see what it could do for me. So just with starting with ownership, when I was able to take ownership of like what was going on in my life, all these external things where I had no play in, I realized I had a lot of control, a lot more control than I thought. And I started to gain some ground. I started to get out of this hole. I started to make a positive influence in my life. I'm like, holy cow, like if this one thing works, like what happens if I implement more of these things? Now you can't implement all of them at once. It's not feasible, right? So I just take one thing at a time. So I moved to cover and move, which you're talking about teamwork, talking about relationships, and that starts with the relationships at work, and that ends with my relationships at home. Because if me and Paige aren't working as a team, then what are we doing? If we're pulling our kids in two different directions, and we're not aligned, if you're not aligned as parents, like the recipe for your kids, you're creating an environment for them to run into issues.
Yeah.
Sidebar on that, what's funny is my oldest son, Bear, he does the cliche, he'll go to mom, then he'll go to me. And lately he's been saying more than ever, he's like, man, why are you and mom on the same team? Because me and Paige always in front of the kids, we're like, hey, we're on the same team. Me and mom are on the same team. And so once I started to implement just one thing at a time, every single one made a positive influence on my life, which made my life better at work and at home. The recipe was on the wall. Implement these things, you win. Implement these things, your life is better. Implement these things, and you're happy. Violate these things, you start to go back into that hole. Violate these things, you start to run into issues. So It's a simple concept. You want to win, you implement the laws of combat. I mean, you violate these things, and you start to lose. And we talk about that at during the FTX. I recorded that on the video. We're going to tell the people tomorrow how you win during these runs, just like how you win in life, comes down to your ability to implement these principles. Yeah. It's as simple as that.
So it's safe to assume you, like millions of other people, extreme ownership changed your life.
100%.
Discipline equals freedom. Jocko talks about it all the time. We all talk about it at Echelon Front. Jocko wrote a book called The Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual. I know I love that book. You love that book. We've talked about it. Where have you used that discipline equals freedom mindset and mentality that we teach at Echelon Front into your personal life that's helped you win?
I think the biggest thing is down to time. So you think of those words discipline and freedom, and people don't think they belong in the same sentence, because discipline is, rigid, strict. Freedom is, it's freedom. You don't need another word for that. I think for me, in the personal side, and I think what a lot of people would agree with, is a freedom that they want is more free time. Now, nobody can give you another hour in the day, and that's not practical that doesn't work. So what that stems down to is being disciplined with your time management. And for me and for you and for a lot of people, everybody's busy and everybody uses the excuse that I don't have enough time, when in reality that's just a lie that we tell ourselves.
Let's go.
And so for me, traveling a lot, being home, there's a lot of excuses revolving around time on, hey, I can't work out, I can't do this, I can't spend time with them, there's excuses. They're easy excuses considering the life that I'm in. When in reality, excuses, let's be clear what excuses are. They're just reasons why you're not doing something that you should do.
Yeah.
Like that's the definition of an excuse. So what it stems down to, if I want more free time to, talk to clients, if I want more free time to talk to you, if I want more free time spending time with my kids, if I want that free time to work out, which I love to work out, then it stems down to my time management, flat out. The problem with that, the whole statement, the problem with the book, Discipline Equals Freedom, is that tendency, discipline, that's not a natural tendency.
Yeah.
People don't like discipline. They like that freedom without the discipline attached to it.
Yeah.
We like the path of least resistance. We like to sleep in. We like to eat food that's not good for us. We like all those things. But when in reality, that the freedom, it's a simple equation. Just be a little more disciplined with your time management, wake up early, stay up later, and then you get that freedom of doing the things that you want to do. So for me, that plays out a lot because for me, I want to, like to your point, I want to be intentional with my kids. Mm-hmm. So sure, I can tell Paige, hey, I want to work out at 5 p.m. when everybody's having dinner, but that's the freedom of having a happy family.
How long is that going to last?
Exactly. So for me, I have two choices. I can wake up early or I can stay up late. I like to spend time with my kids in the morning because my kids, like most kids, wake up super early in the morning. Even though I was in the military, I don't like waking up early. Jocko's going to be offended with me not waking up early.
Well, he ain't going to be offended because he knows that to be true by me, and he's kept me around this whole time.
But my kids go to bed at 8 o'clock, and then I work out at 9:30, 10 p.m. in my sauna of a garage.
Yeah, because
I do that.
You left California, right?
Yeah, back in the Phoenix area.
Nice.
But I save that time. I'm intentional with my time because that gives me the freedom to work out.
Yeah. And your wife is able to join you with some of those workouts, right?
Yeah.
Gives you guys some quality time?
Yeah. It gives us some quality time. And what's cool is she, at least once a week, what she wants to do is do a workout that, that I build. I don't run, but I participate in a CrossFit program.
Yeah.
And in Arizona summers, it's not fun to do. But there's something to say, what I learned in the Marine Corps, doing hard stuff together, that creates a bond.
Yeah.
And, her tenacity and ability to want to do some of the crazy stuff that I do, because I do crazy stuff.
Yeah.
When you do stuff together like that, it's only going to make you stronger as a couple. And so it's been really cool to see. And every week now we switch off on what we're going to do. I mean, my Friday nights and Friday nights look a lot different now than they do 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Sadly, I had to learn that lesson. It took me a while to get to it. But my priorities now, I'm completely aligned with what they should be. Not what I want to do, but what I need to do. Mm-hmm. And that's being disciplined, spending time with my family, and doing things that are beneficial for me. They don't inhibit me in what my goals are.
You were saying, I know you and I have talked about this quite often with clients and with people, and you also do executive coaching, and I do executive coaching. Well, everyone at Echelon Front can do executive coaching with people if it's requested and if we have the desire to do that. And I know you and I have talked about how eventually your mindset can shift because, like you're saying, most people don't want to do these things because they want to eat the crappy food. They want to do those things. But the more disciplined you are with those things, the more freedom it gives. Ultimately, you can start to shift that perspective of like, hey, I want to eat this junk food too. Actually, I don't want to eat this junk food. I mean, you and I were joking about just like for this podcast, bringing in like a dozen boxes of hot tamales.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because we like hot tamales.
So good.
But then we were talking about, how disgusting we would feel tonight and tomorrow and just feeling like crap. And so it's like, yes, we joked about how we wanted to eat all this candy tonight, but then we realized like, actually, we really don't want to do that. And so, I know that's something that, you've really learned and you've helped other people learn as well. It's like, hey, actually, the more disciplined you are, like these things, these habits that we know aren't good long term, you eventually don't want to do those things anymore because you can actually start to change the habits and tendencies. Do you believe that to be true as well?
100%. That's what I was gonna say. Is habits and tendencies are not set in stone.
Come on.
They're hard to break. They're maybe cemented in, but a sledgehammer or something, it can break that up.
Yeah.
It takes time to break habits and tendencies, but
Yeah.
you can definitely get out of whatever you're going through right now.
So not that this changed any crazy, it's not that you had any of these bad habits or tendencies before you went to this event last year, but when you said, hey, something, right, or someone can come and change, just your perspectives on things. Our friends, Matt and Michelle Russell, they have a ministry called Walking in Truth Ministries. And when I went to their event called Pursuit, I went to Pursuit 4 in February of 2022. Stephen Little, who I'm partners with Little Cattle Co., and he's one of my best friends. He got me to go to this event. And, it was just his boldness, right? His boldness to invite me to the event and just, I know I've shared with you that story about how we went to Jiu-Jitsu and then afterwards he was like, hey bro, I'm not doing a good job as a friend. And it got me to go to the event. And after I went to Pursuit, when I got done with that event on Sunday, on Monday, I flew to Nashville to meet with you and Danny and Cowie and a group of guys for an FTX that we were doing. And actually, no, Cowie wasn't there. Cowie was in Arizona. It was you and Danny in Nashville that I met you there. And I sat with you and Danny that night in the hotel room and just explained to you what I had worked through and what Pursuit did for me. And Walking in Truth it's a freedom-based ministry event that Matt and Michelle have. And, for me, it was a complete game changer. And then I told you about it. And is it fair for me to assume that you saw a difference in me after I went through that event?
100%.
Okay. And it wasn't like my life was all jacked up and I was like this horrible person and not doing what I needed to do at Echelon Front. It was just things shifted on the inside and it got me back to where I needed to be with my focus, with my relationship with God and my boldness and my faith and, and stuff like that. And when you went to Pursuit, what was Pursuit like for you?
I was hesitant to go. And
Yeah.
I think, as you know, I wasn't sure on going in the first place.
Yeah.
Just, habits and tendencies.
Most people that end up go say exactly what you said. My detailed story. There are some major hesitations for me to go.
Yeah, and I was just making excuse after excuse and was being pulled in a lot of directions on reasons not to go. And you being who you are, recognize that it was literally only things that would come out of it would be beneficial, and it would make my life better in every aspect of being a father, a husband, a teammate. There's no con associated with it.
Yeah.
Me being stubborn, I remember you literally blocked it off on my calendar for me, so I had no choice. It's one of those moments which I think this is the one and only time you've ever done it, but this was, hey, I'm your boss, and this is something that you're gonna do. This isn't an option, and I would say if you had multiple conversations like that with me, potentially I never would have gone. And if you leveraged your position as my boss, be like, hey, you have to do this, and now you have to do this. But this was the one and only time. So I knew the fact that you were going out, putting yourself on a limb, potentially risking a little piece of our relationship to make me go, I knew that it meant a lot to you, which in the end meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
So you doing that just, the door was open, but I just needed a gentle push through it. And then once I was there, my perspective changed and just it opened up a lot of things that I wasn't aware of. Because for me, my relationship with God and what I talked about at Pursuit was I was always looking for this glamorous showing, this I would have to see to believe, like a practical thing. And what it stemmed down to was just being aware of the signs, being aware of what was going on, because I was unaware. So that's what happened when I was there. But the whole thing with, my relationship with God in the first place, it goes back to when I was dating Paige. When I was dating Paige back in, early 2015, Paige comes from a religious family. I wasn't that religious. I went to church as a kid and stuff like that, but as I got older, it wasn't a priority in my life. Being in the military,
Yeah, just wasn't a priority
It
at the
just
time.
it wasn't a thing.
You fell off the path in regards to your walk.
Oh, 100%. Then I met someone who was extremely religious. I tell people all the time we're complete opposites. That's part of our complete oppositeness, especially when we started dating. And we hit a lot of feedback on who we were. There was a lot of voices on who I was and who she was, and that we didn't belong together. We wanted to get married. We had every intention. We were potentially going to elope and all this stuff. And then we actually got pregnant. So we got pregnant, and it was still early on, and we started to tell people. And that was bad news for a lot of people, to the point where a lot of people that were around the situation were wishing that we have a miscarriage.
Ooh.
That were putting stuff out there in terms of, we hope this happens, this is not meant to be, and we actually did end up having a miscarriage. And that, at the moment, that broke Paige, and I remember that was the trial that we went through, was this whole situation. And when that happened, my viewpoint on God, my taste of it was completely sour. Like, it was the whole, how could this happen? Like, how could you let this happen? Like, this is something you could have controlled. So that, if my path was already off, my path was completely off at that point. So that was 2015, which that was just something that we had to work through. It wasn't meant to be at the time, and we had 4 kids after the fact.
Yeah.
Bear happened later that year.
Yeah.
We ended up getting married, and the people that were not happy with the situation are happy now. So that was what I was walking in with. So my expectations were really low. I was waiting for this glamorous showing of God to show up and just enlighten me with all this stuff, and that wasn't a reality. But the day, my day in the wilderness, the signs were very apparent when you're actually looking for them.
Yeah.
When you're not looking for them, then of course they're never going to be there. Yeah. And so from that, I was able to learn a lot about, who I am and what I'm able to do and what, he's able to provide. And just the path has been there all along.
That's right.
I just wasn't looking for it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You got a Bible verse that you like that's kind of like a go-to for you?
Yes. So I would say this has been probably the last couple of years, but Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. I heard the voice of the Lord say, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me.
I mean, that's a pretty common verse amongst, a lot of our teammates and fallen teammates and their families. And as you read on, verse 9, he says, and he said, yes, go and say this to people. Listen carefully, but do not understand. Watch closely, but learn nothing. Harden the hearts of these people, plug their ears and shut their eyes. That way they will not see with their eyes, nor hear with their ears, nor understand with their hearts, and turn to me for healing. And then I said, Lord, how long will this go on? And he replied, until their towns are empty, their houses are deserted, and the whole country is wasteland. And until the Lord has sent everyone away, and the entire land of Israel lies deserted. It's pretty intense. Like, if you keep reading that along, it gets pretty intense. Lucas, you're our pastor.
Oh, man.
What insight? I mean,
Yeah.
that gets deep real quick.
It does really fast, and this is such a cool chapter because like Isaiah is brought into the presence of God, and like in verse 3 is when we see all of the angels who are flying around proclaiming like holy, holy, holy is the Lord of armies. The whole earth is filled with his glory. We see that same kind of thing in Revelation, that is exactly what's being said around there. And Isaiah has this moment where he has the opportunity to not do what God has called him to do, and no one else is. And so God has chosen him and said, there's no one that will go who can go, because there's nobody in the cities that are desolate. And when Isaiah says that, and then he's given the mission, That like you're going to go to a people that hate me in order to proclaim my word. You're gonna go to towns and villages that are gonna have to be decimated. Like it's the same thing that we see in Jonah. Whenever Jonah has to go to Nineveh, and God's like, I'm gonna destroy Nineveh if they don't repent. And that's what Jonah wanted to have happen because they had turned against God. And yet Isaiah wants to do everything he can to prevent that. And I think especially for y'all who have served in the military, it's like that's what you're called to do. You're called to go into places where people are going to hate you just because of your presence in that place, to rebuild societies that have been broken down by people who have turned against their own in order to, drive their own agendas. And this idea that we have to be willing, that Isaiah puts forth, who will I go? Who will stand for us? It's like, here I am, send me. And he doesn't even know what the mission is. He just knows he's supposed to go and do what God has called him to do. Is so cool because it's going to change from time to time in our lives.
Yeah.
Right. Like right now it's with Echelon Front. In 10 years down the road, what's that going to look like when you've got kids in high school at that point, right? That your kids are going to start driving. What's it mean to be sent by God at that point? And keeping this mindset is just such a cool thing.
And it's huge for us to understand that also from a faith aspect.
Yeah, man.
And just having that faith and I don't know. Thank you for sharing that verse with us, and thank you for elaborating on that. That was awesome.
It's one of the coolest verses in the entirety of Scripture, man.
Yeah. I have a few more things. I want to be obviously respectful of our listeners' time, and we talked about time and how it's important multiple times. I mean, we're up here late. All right, it's late. We've got an early morning tomorrow, but I asked you if you would do this, and without hesitation, Cody's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, what do you think? And we have a few moments that we could get it done this week because of our crazy schedules. And Lucas, I appreciate your time with this tonight as well, and Cody making a priority and him understanding it's important for us to do this. Is there any other books that you've read that have had like a pretty legit impact that you recommend to people other than, Extreme Ownership, Dichotomy of Leadership Strategy and Tactics? Is there another book that you've read that you're like, man, this is, I enjoy it. I like rereading it. I share it with other people.
I think the cliche would always be the Jocko books. And what I've learned from Jocko and from you is, regardless of the book, when you look at it from a leadership perspective, it changes how you read things. So you can take that for what you want. But if I was to pick a specific book, not a Jocko one, it would be a Jordan Peterson book. So his first book, 12 Rules for Life.
Oh, yeah.
So just dealing with the chaos of life and how you handle those. He's a prolific speaker and has great insight, perspective on, emotions, everything that goes into it. He has actually a marriage series, which is really cool. He's been married for 30 something years, but a lot of insight on how we deal with just the chaos of life, which there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So
yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, we are going to continue this next week with Cody. We want to be respectful of your guys' time. Cody, how do we find you on social media? How do you want people to follow Game Day Gandy?
I guess I need to change my name.
He's going to beat me up later. Like, I'm going to pay the man.
So just on Instagram, I try not to juggle too many things, so just Instagram for me, and it's just Cody, Codey. Have to be special, throw an E in there. Codey.Gandy. Gandy is a candy with a G for spelling. So just Codey.Gandy. I'm on there. I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate you being on here. Looking forward to continuing this conversation on our next episode. Lucas, thank you for all of your stuff. Before we close it out, I know you have to have a question or two for Cody.
I got a list of stuff over here. So the first thing I want, because my wife and I are looking at the same, we're thinking, 4 kids under 5 years old, because I'm old. Right, I'm way older than you are, and just barely younger than JP. So, what I want to know in particular is, how do you balance detachment and engagement with 4 kids that are under 5 years old?
Detachment and engagement. So I think There's a bunch of different ways that I could spin this. In terms of detaching, so are you specifically talking about detaching from the chaos, from the emotional side, typically
Yeah, like the frustration of whatever just happened, to stay engaged enough with your kids to like teach them the lesson, because I think that's really difficult, especially for like any of our listeners who you work a job, you're frustrated with, things, and a lot of dads in particular, they get home and they're getting slammed with like the chaos of what happens at the house. How do you leave all of that stuff behind, stay engaged with your kids, and then detach from that chaos to be able to enjoy it?
I simply just ask myself, and I'd tell the same answer to somebody that runs a team versus somebody that runs a household. When people mess up, whether it's a kid or an adult, ask yourself the question: did they do this on purpose? So when my kids go make a mistake, like JP talked about this a couple days ago, I walked outside in the morning. We just put in a new swing set. The kids are excited, and my yard's flooded. We live in Arizona. It's all rock. It doesn't make any sense. It didn't rain. And my oldest son took a pair of snips and cut all the drip lines. And so it's easy for me to be like, oh my gosh, you 5-year-old, like, how could you do this? But I mean, he doesn't know he's 5. And I often ask myself, because it's really easy for me to get frustrated, get angry at, my 5, 4, 3, and 1-year-old, but they don't know. They're just kids. Like what they know to do is simply what I've taught them. So if they make a mistake, that's not on them, that's on me. So I ask myself, did they do this on purpose? Because some people will say, well, yeah, they did this on purpose. Well, even more so, that's even more my fault, even though you can only have so much, like it's my fault or it's my fault.
Yeah.
If they're doing this on purpose, well, then I have created an environment where that's acceptable. So at the end of the day, it just stems down to, hey, they're not doing this on purpose for the majority of the time. If they do this on purpose, that still falls back on me because, hey, whether you're the leader of a team or a leader of a house, you are still the person that's in charge and responsible. So for me, it's become really easy for me. It's almost comical when my kids do something, messed up, or they break something or stuff like that. I mean, they're just being kids. And if I create an environment where it's not okay to make mistakes and it's not okay to fail, shoot, down the road when they actually do face that, when I'm not around, like, what are they going to do? So I want to create an environment where we can have the conversations on. I mean, you saw the video and I asked the kids, hey, who did this? I only shot that thing one time. My 5-year-old was like, that's me. Not because he's fearful that I'm going to whoop him afterwards, because I don't do that, but literally that's just what I've taught them. So I want to create an environment where when my kids do make a mistake, they don't want to hide it. They don't want to be fearful. They don't want to blame other people, because we talk about extreme ownership. That habit's created when you're little. Mm-hmm. It's created when kids are 5 and 4 when they make mistakes because they don't want to get in trouble. So I want to break that tendency early. I want my tendency of my 5, 4, 3, and 1-year-old to be, oh, hey, that was my fault. I actually messed that up. And now me and my 5-year-old can fight over that ownership rather than me scolding him shutting down, him getting defensive, him getting depressed, and him not wanting to come to me down the road. So I know more than ever that I'm creating that environment right now, and I want to set them up for success by having these conversations, having a place where it's okay to make mistakes, because they're not intentional with it. They're simply kids just making kid mistakes because they don't know any better. And if they don't know any better, then, hey, that's my fault. I'm their dad. That's the environment that I have created. I have not taught them. I have not shown them. I have not set them up for success.
That's awesome. And the second one I have kind of goes hand in hand with that, because they're in the ability to detach. It takes a lot of discipline to train yourself to be able to do that, right? You're talking about training traits and habits. Discipline is one that personally I struggle with, right? And I've got my litany of excuses that are ready as soon as somebody says like, hey, why are you consistently like 5 minutes late to stuff? Like, that's a discipline issue. And I'm like, well, no, I've got ADD and I'm distracted and I have all these things. So when we live in a culture that gives us excuses for not being disciplined, how do you teach discipline to a culture that says you don't have to be disciplined, and here are all the personal excuses you have for that it's not your fault that you aren't disciplined. It's these conditions that you're living with or that you possess.
I always talk, because we get a lot of questions on discipline, because the natural tendency is not to be disciplined, to your point. Right. I think a lot of people, when they go on this path of becoming disciplined, whether it's with food, whether it's with fitness, is they take on too much at once. So you have people that are severely overweight and they consume a bunch of calories, and then hey, tomorrow I'm going to eat, a box of wheat thins and that's it. And they make this drastic overcorrection and it's not sustainable. So they do it for 1-2 days, a week max. And they're like, oh my gosh, that sucks. I don't want to do that again. And then they fall off the path. You go to fitness, you have somebody that's never trained, they're out of weight, they can't run, and the first thing they do is they go run 12 miles, and they're like, oh, now I can't do any fitness ever again.
Anything.
And so people make these grand gestures in hopes that they can fix something overnight when that's not the reality. Like this stuff, it takes time, it takes effort. It's a campaign. Everything that we teach is a campaign, especially discipline. You want to create that habit. It takes a long time. So I think it's small steps, attainable steps, getting in the right direction, and then you hit that marker. Maybe if it's weight loss, or maybe if it's showing up on time, if that's something. Part of it is, hey, this week I'm going to strive to no more than 5 minutes, before or after. Like that's my goal. Like that's a small step. It's not 2 hours before. Like that's grand. It's 5 minutes. And then once you check that box, okay, cool. Then next time I don't have to set that alarm, or next time it's 15 minutes. And then eventually you don't have to think about it, because that's when the habit or tendency is created. So small attainable steps where you can achieve some victory in it, till eventually I achieve victory here, and eventually the habit, which is that water bottle, I can get to it by these small steps that I can obtain. The problem is we do this 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and that thing's never in reach. And then off the path we go every single time. And that's when somebody who's been struggling with discipline for years, and they'll use these excuses because they're not providing a situation where that victory is actually achievable.
That's awesome, man.
That's good. I think that's a good point to be able to wrap it.
Yeah, for sure. I've got action items now that I'm taking home.
Yeah, same. I have a lot of action items. Again, Lucas, thank you for this evening. Cody, thank you for being here. Thank you for making the time. This has been the JP Dinnell podcast, episode 2. We'll see you guys soon.